Welcome back. I'm Alfred Lamront Weber, and we have the great privilege today to be with a colleague and a friend, author Paul Levy, who has been on our show before, talking about his prior book, The Mind of George W. Bush, and we've asked Paul to join us, which he has graciously agreed to do, on his newest book, Dispelling Wetiko. Is that the right way to?
Yeah, sure. There's no right way. That's
I
the way
see.
I say it, just the way you said it, spelling Wetiko. But people pronounce it differently, and I'm not overly attached to if there's a correct way or not.
Right, right. Now, I was very, to me, this is really a key insight and a key book, especially for the processes that are occurring in our own homes, in our cities, in our nation, in our world at the time. And uh, Catherine Austin Fitz, who is a great person and a great mind, writes the foreword, and she starts out with a story where a strategic planning group visits her company, and this group is from the CIA, and at one point they turn to her, that is one of their advanced strategic planners, and they tell her, you know what your problem is? You don't understand where evil comes from. And I think that was, I mean, that sentence just jumped out at me because that really is what your book is about. Where does evil come from? And I think that is something that we're all struggling with in our generations. Certainly, they have in others, but because it's very difficult to pin down.
Hmm.
And taking that perspective, I wondered if you could start walking us through the process that got you to this book and how the insights of that book relate to you don't understand where evil comes from.
Sure,
What is evil and where does it come from?
sure, totally. Yeah, well, I just really appreciate the question because the source of the book came from my own personal experience, in that a number of decades ago, I began having personal encounters with evil, not just with like the personal shadow of another person or of a group or myself, but we're talking of archetypal evil that had somehow come into my life, and it came in my family. And the actual story isn't important right now, but it came through my father, and what I began to notice was that, oh, it wasn't just a personal energy; it was actually coming through the whole field, the non-local field of consciousness, almost as if it was configuring events in the world to, in a sense, to hide itself and to play itself out. And it was coming through the unconscious of people, of myself, of my father, of just my whole family. And then I got put in contact with the psychiatric system. Here, what was happening for me, just in essence, I began, based on my father enacting this incredible, this evil that I had no understanding about because I was so young. It created enormous suffering for me. So I went really inwards. I had, after a couple of years of really contemplating what was going on inside of me, I had a life-changing spiritual awakening that wasn't recognized. And not only was it not recognized, it was pathologized. I was immediately put into the hands of psychiatrists who, they're just trained to see pathology, and they diagnosed me and medicated me and guaranteed I have this At that point, they said it was a chemical imbalance for the rest of my life. And, you know, it's been proven that chemical imbalance is totally bogus. Now, keep in mind, I'm not talking about, you know, when I wrote this book about evil, I'm not talking in a metaphysical sense. I'm not qualified to do so. I'm talking psychologically, that there's an energy that it's important to find the right name for these energies, and evil is, you know, absolutely the right name for this energy that operates through the blind spots of our unconscious in a way that we become compelled to act out evil in a way that we're like the instruments for it to embody itself in the world, while simultaneously it hides itself from us, from seeing what we're doing or from seeing how it's operating through our unconscious. And the indigenous people called this Wetiko. That's what Wetiko is. It's the spirit of evil. It's the spirit that informs man's inhumanity to itself. And so what I've done, I haven't discovered anything. I'm a translator because I was on the front lines for decades, and it almost destroyed me. It almost killed me, being put in psychiatric hospitals and then the abuse from my father. But the whole while I was taking notes and drawing maps and studying and going inwards and following my dreams and creating art and, you know, just doing whatever I could do to get a handle on what it was like something was being shown to me. And it was either going to destroy me or I was going to have some sense of some understanding of what is this. And I began to understand it's not just a personal energy. In the Bible, they'll talk about its powers and principalities, that we're not just fighting against, you know, evil in flesh and blood, but that some sort of higher dimensional archetypal sort of energy that is actually, whose origin is in the psyche, is in the unconscious of our species. And it actually has this quality where it will dissolve the boundary between the inner and the outer, such that this inner process that operates through our blind spots actually somehow configures events in the world to express itself and to play itself out. And that's amazing. But also that is a doorway into discovering its cure. Because what I'm describing, an inner situation that actually expresses itself through the outside world, that's a dream. That's exactly what a dream is. You know, when we're inside of a night dream, it's our inner process actually expressing itself through the medium of the seemingly outer dream, which is just a reflection of our inner process. So that actually became this doorway into understanding that encoded in this unbelievable higher dimensional dark evil force was its own medicine. It was actually potentially helping us to wake up. So it was either going to destroy us, or if enough of us actually had the actual recognition of what was being revealed to us, it could actually help us to wake up. So that's what basically the book is about. And, you know, what the Wetiko, it's like a virus. It operates through the mind. It's a I call it a psychospiritual disease of the soul. It's a form of blindness, of psychic blindness, such that when we're inflicted with it, we actually believe that we're seeing clearly. And not only that, we, in our arrogance, believe we're seeing more clearly than anyone else. And it works through the projective tendencies of the mind. I can talk about that over the course of this interview. And so it actually tricks us. It usurps our creative genius for how we actually dream up and create reality against us. So instead of creating this world that actually serves all of us, it actually turns our actual genius for how we actually create our experience against us in a way that's destroying us. And that's the Wetiko virus. And so in essence, that's a real succinct answer. I could go on for hours. I mean, it's my life's work about, you know, what that is and how it operates.
Sure. Now, there's also a term called archons.
Right.
Is this another term for archons, or is it a similar realm, or is there a difference?
Yeah, my understanding, I mean, you know, my understanding is that, you know, in Gnosticism, that's where archons comes from. They call these higher dimensional seeming entities archons, and that from my understanding, and I've studied that a lot, that seems to be just another name or another symbol system for Wetiko. I don't think of them as any different at all. And from the point of view that I'm trying to get across, my translation of these energies and entities, they're really very, very similar, if not the same.
Right, right. Now, I've heard several different theories about how the Wetiko or the Archonic dimension, if I can use that term,
Sure.
Came into this universe or our reality. Have you discovered what the source of this is that came into our reality? I mean, where it came into the current order of things?
So I contemplate that in the book, and there are all these theories, whether it was some sort of like collective trauma, thousands of years ago, or some sort of like negative ET intrusion, or and all that. And there are all these different theories that I try to cover in the book. But the conclusion I draw is that the important thing is that these entities, ultimately speaking, don't even exist. They have no substantial existence. They don't intrinsically exist, which means that they're actually being recreated, and we're complicit in the actual generation of them in this moment and in this moment. And that's the important point, to start to theorize. That, in a sense, is to miss the mark. The point is that the Wetiko epidemic, it's a collective psychosis. Wetiko is a psychic epidemic. It's a collective psychosis that we, all 7 billion of us, are co-dreaming. We're dreaming it up together in this moment, each and every moment. And that's the salient, important point. Okay? And now understand something. If somebody says, oh, well, they have Wetiko and I don't, well, that point of view is to itself be an expression that they've fallen under the spell of Wetiko, because it feeds off of polarization and separation and fear and creating an other. And then the whole projection of the shadow, which I can talk about in a bit. So the idea being that any of us at any moment, I mean, who can't fall into their unconscious and act unwittingly with the best of intentions, act out their unconscious. The point is any of us can do that. In that same way that any of us, until we become fully and utterly enlightened, whatever that means, if there even is anybody like that, until that happens, we all potentially can fall asleep at any given moment and fall under the spell of the Wetiko virus. And that creates sort of like this humbleness, which is the immunization of the bug. And then we won't just solidify somebody else's having it thinking we don't, which is itself to fall under its spell.
Right, right. So how do you normally then explain to groups, I mean, taking our listeners or our viewers as a group, how do you normally introduce us, taking me as a group and all of those who are watching, to what you've learned?
Sure.
And so that we can share this and begin to understand it.
Sure. No, I appreciate that's a perfect question. And understand, like in the Don Juan books, the Castaneda books, Don Juan, he doesn't say Wetiko, but he talks about, he's pointing at it when he's talking to Carlos, and he says, this is the topic of topics. This is the most important thing that there is to understand. And there are 3 things that are all interrelated that help you even begin to see Wetiko. And one is when you begin to realize that the nature of our experience, it's as if we're having a mass shared collective dream that we're all dreaming up together. That's number 1. Number 2 is that you begin to see there's the non-local field that's pervading and informing everything, and that's expressing itself through all of us. And the third thing is when you realize 1 and 2, the dreamlike nature and the field, you begin to realize, oh, we're actually interconnected and interdependent. We're not separate. And that's when you begin to, when you have all three of those together, which are interconnected, they're not separate, perspectives, you begin to see, that's when you begin to start to see Wetiko, how it operates not only seemingly outside of yourself in world events and in relationships and other people and through their unconscious, but in your own mind. Now, one way of understanding that is like just imagine, for example, if you're in a dream, if you're in a night dream, right? And imagine you're in that dream and you're holding a viewpoint in that dream. Well, what is that night dream? That dream is nothing other than a reflection of your own mind. So if you change your viewpoint, that dream has no choice but to spontaneously shapeshift and reflect back your change in viewpoint, because the dream is nothing than a projection of your own mind. Now that shapeshifting, that change happens outside of time in no time, faster than the twinkling of an eye. And what that means is that as soon as the dream then changes, unless we're awake to that, we're actually to the nature of our situation, i.e., that we're in a dream. If we don't realize that, we're then going to become entranced by the form of the dream, by the way the dream is manifesting, thinking that it exists objectively, separate from us. We then react to that dream as if it exists objective, separate from us, which it will then mirror that back as if it's objective, and then we entranced ourselves by the genius, by our own genius for creating reality that's intrinsic to our own mind. Now, that's an example in a night dream. I'm saying that's the nature of our situation in the waking dream, that we actually become entranced by the forms of this universe, thinking they exist objectively separate from us. We react to it, and then that just gets reflected back. And guess what? That's the Wetiko spell. We've fallen under the genius of our own mind. When more and more of us, not just one person, but more and more of us actually have that realization and connect with each other and help each other to stabilize that realization and deepen that realization, that's when we can literally change the dream, the waking dream we're having, and that's evolution. And that's what this is all about. That's what is encoded in Wetiko. Because if you remember, I was saying that encoded in the deepest, darkest evil of Wetiko is a blessing, is its own medicine. It's literally helping us to wake up. And it depends if enough of us have the recognition of what's being shown to us.
Right. Right. So this is all about expansion of consciousness then. That is one. This is all about awakening and about becoming conscious to this. And then as one becomes conscious to these levels, then simply they cease to exist. Is that basically what you're saying? Or
yeah, it's like, it is like being in a nightmare. And when you're in a nightmare and you don't know you're dreaming, it all seems really real. But when you wake up, when you have either lucidity in the nightmare and you're able to have like a lucid dream at that point, or you wake up from the dream, what happened to that nightmare? It's gone. It's just, it doesn't exist. It actually never existed separate from your own mind. And so if I can just, to explain the psychology, because there's all these different arms of Wetiko. There's like, it has a mythology to it, and there's a psychology to it. So if I can just explain, because it really operates through the shadow, through the personal dimension, to the extent, say, for example, if I'm not in touch, if I'm disassociated from like the evil in myself, from my own shadow, what am I going to do? Well, if I'm split off from my own shadow, in a night dream or in the waking dream, I project it out. I project out the shadow. And then, of course, say go back to that night dream. If I project my own darkness in a night dream, well, then what's going to happen? The dream is going to supply evidence. It's going to supply certain beings, certain people who are going to be carrying my shadow, who are going to be embodying that split off part of my own darkness. And then all of a sudden, they're appearing seemingly outside of myself in the night dream. And now I have evidence that the darkness really is out there. So that even makes me more entrenched in projecting my own shadow. And the more I do that, the more they embody the shadow. And it's a feedback loop. It's an infinite feedback loop whose origin is my own mind. And of course, they're doing the same thing to me. And what I'm describing is not just in a night dream, but in like the waking dream. And when I project the shadow out, then what do I want to do? At a certain point, I want to destroy it because that's ultimately a reflection of what I'm doing to my internal shadow. I'm wanting to, like, in splitting it off, I'm wanting to get rid of it, to exterminate it. So then I try to kill the person or the country or the terrorist or whoever they are that's carrying my own darkness. And by doing that, I literally become possessed by the very evil I'm trying to destroy. And what I've just described, that's the psychological dynamic of Wetiko, and that's madness. That's absolute, utter madness. And like I'm saying about Wetiko, it's a collective psychosis. Our species has fallen into a collective psychosis, and very few people are talking about it, which is an expression of how profound and pervasive the collective psychosis is.
Right. Now, there's also a way of looking at it that would say that the hidden controllers of society, the shadow government using advanced mind control, is actually, for example, they have remote neural technologies that can take a group like a family that's loving each other, and within 5 minutes they're just hating each other and shouting because that remote neural technology has gone in and played with the and intervened in the morphic field there and created created a lot of separation there. So is that and so they are acting in a Wetiko way. So it would seem that the epidemic that we're having is because the Earth, our matrix authorities generally, we've been taken over by governments and others who are using technologies like these to really target populations and bring them into evil. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, totally. And that, I mean, and that on the relative level, by which I mean, that's actually happening. That's true. But like, for example, one way to understand even how Wetiko fits into the scenario you just described with the mind control, because I'm very aware of, like, the whatever, the Illuminati or the shadow government, as far as that's real stuff. That's not, if people think that's just paranoid conspiracy, well, they just need to open their eyes. Because the evidence is all around us.
Right.
And for example, say if we had a superpower and we were able to take out all of the people, however many there are, all around the planet who are in the positions of power who are implementing that. And if we thought that would be the solution of the problem, no, because they're just these minions. They're just getting cast in roles of the deeper archetype. There's a deeper, higher dimensional archetype of, you could call it that it's manifesting seemingly as evil, but unless we actually see that and recognize that and integrate that and come to terms with that, we could take out all of the people who are, like, in those positions of power, who are implementing all of, like, the mind control technology and the centralization of control and power and all those things. And invariably, those roles would just get filled over the course of time by other people, what I call sort of like central casting would just send more people to play those roles. So the point being, it's sort of like in The Wizard of Oz when you pull the curtain, when Toto pulls the curtain and Dorothy sees the wizard, but instead of there being a wizard and he's the source of the problem, you pull the curtain and there's just a formless archetype. There's no one there at all. And the origin of that archetype is in our own mind. You see, that's what, when I say that, so on the relative level, that stuff is really real and needs to be dealt with. But on the absolute level, the Wetiko virus doesn't even exist. There's no such thing. Absolutely doesn't have any reality whatsoever, and simultaneously it can destroy our species. Okay? And what that means, the implication of that, is that each of us has an untapped, invisible, immense power in us for actually creating reality. And because we're unconscious of it, that incredible creative potency that all of us have is being implemented, and the way to understand this, and I go into this in my book, is when you understand this being a dream, then when you hold that perspective, then everything just becomes clarified and you begin to see this deeper process and you begin to realize, oh my God, the real solution is for each of us to find that place in ourselves. Because the thing about Wetiko, it's a daimonic energy. It's an archetypal energy. And the word daimon, it actually means the guiding spirit or the inner voice. And what a daimonic energy. It's an energy, it's a transpersonal energy that can literally take over a person. It can take over a group of people or a nation or a species. And yet encoded in the daimonic, it actually means the guiding spirit, the inner voice, the genius. But if we don't connect with our genius, then it becomes a demon. That daimon becomes negative and becomes a demon, and that's what we're seeing. Okay, so the point is that daimonic energy, it can literally take us over, and when we're taken over, we have, by definition, we don't know we're possessed. And that's the way Wetiko works. When I said it works through the unconscious, that's what I mean. And then people, they think they're just acting out of their own consciousness, and yet they're unwittingly being an instrument for some darker power to act itself out through them.
Right, right. So, what sort of solutions then do you advocate for this?
Yeah. No, well, and that's the real question, because I'm not. So in my book, I talk about that it's incredibly important to sort of cross-pollinate between being a spiritual practitioner and being a political activist. That if you're just a political activist with the best of intentions and you're fighting against evil, well, by fighting against evil, you're in a polarized state. You're unwittingly feeding Wetiko, even though you have the best of intentions.
I see.
But then there are spiritual practitioners who are feeling, oh, if I get myself all enlightened, well, then the whole universe will just reflect that back.
Oh.
And on one hand, that's true. And on another hand, that's complete bullshit. Because the point is, we're at the point in evolution where our inner process is literally getting dreamed up as the outer world. So the outer world is actually the medium through which we actually can work on our inner process. Mm-hmm. And what that means, so people who are just, oh, I'm going to meditate and say my mantras, yeah, that's great. But if you're doing that and you're avoiding actually engaging and participating in the greater body politic, then you also are feeding Wetiko. So the point being, we have to synthesize and integrate. It's what I call becoming a spiritually informed political activist, with a spiritual practitioner and the political activist actually, support, and like I was saying, cross-pollinate each other. And then, but the point even, so your question really is like the question, what is the solution? And I would then further the inquiry by saying, yeah, by any one of us actually shedding light on the Wetiko virus in our own mind, by us doing that, it's actually in a non-local way having an effect on the collective unconscious, on the entire universe. And particularly when more and more of us have that realization and, like I was saying, come together and connect with each other, that can really, really change things. And the way to understand that, just go back to the dream. If you're in a night dream, say you're in a night dream, and you have lucidity, and you've realized, oh my God, I'm dreaming. Okay, well, that's fine and dandy, but then there's still 7 billion other people in that night dream, all dream characters, parts of yourself, who don't have that realization. But imagine if 1 or 2 or 10 or 100 or 1,000 other people, other dream characters in your dream, have also that understanding of lucidity, and they come together and they contemplate, wow, what are we realizing? We're realizing that we're in a mass shared dream, and there's a way of putting our lucidity together with that realization that we are dreaming, where we can literally change the dream. That's what's available to us, not only just in a night dream, but in the waking dream. That's what's being offered to us.
Okay, good. Now, let me try and connect the lines that we were going in your previous book, The Mind of George W. Bush,
okay,
to the current book, Wetiko, Breaking the Curse of Evil, with the upcoming 2016 election for president of the U.S., even though we just started in January 2015. As of right now, there are two political dynasties that are the leading candidates. Republican is Jeb Bush, so it's another Bush, and Hillary Clinton, and another Clinton. And if one does the research on both of those parties, we at our news agency have released news stories showing that both of those parties, the Bushes and the Clintons, engage in ritual child sacrifice, engage in pedophile circles, engage in human blood drinking. There's hard evidence that both Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton have been involved in serious assassinations. Hillary Clinton of John F. Kennedy Jr., because John F. Kennedy Jr. informed her that he was going to run against her in the Senate and then again for president, and the Clinton gang took him out along with the Bush gang, because the Bush and the Clinton gangs are allied. And there's now, Chip Tatum has just come out with a very lengthy article showing that Jeb Bush actually masterminded assassinations on behalf of the Bush cocaine gang, George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, and Jeb Bush, of people like Barry Seal. And this is multiple witnesses. It's absolutely documented. So the United States has now dreamed up a situation where they've got arch criminals. You know, which arch criminal do you want, a male or a female?
Right.
And that's coming into the house of authority. So that would allow more criminality and evil to, you know, once again, we would have the pedophile parties in the White House that they had during the Bush years, perhaps the child sacrifices that they had at the White House, you know. So how can we change that dream? I mean, this is my, I put out a mantra called a white hat in the White House. You know, black hat is a person who works for the shadow government.
Right.
A white hat is a person who works for the betterment of humankind. And we need a white hat in the White House, which has been a long time coming.
Right.
So how can we use the knowledge that you've gained to change the collective American dream? Because most of the planet is saying America is just destroying us. They're making war on us. They're destroying the planet. They're destroying the environment. I mean, not totally America, because China is doing its bit also.
Sure.
So I turn that over to you. That kind of
no, and I hear you. I mean,
that long-winded question.
Yeah. No, totally. I appreciate that, because I get it. The idea that, you know, whether it's Jeb Bush or Hillary Clinton, I mean, they're both totally corrupted. They're both completely in the pockets of the powers that be, you know, and so I fully agree with that. And what I would say, what comes up for me with reference to that question is, well, if this is a dream, then what's playing out in all the dimensions of our experience? In other words, intra-personally within ourselves, inter-personally between ourselves, and in a collective sense with the whole greater body politic of our country, of the world. It's all a synchronistic reflection of something inside of us. So I go back to when any one of us has that recognition. So I'll just give you a beautiful image. Jung himself used this image a lot, where he would say, when you have, like, say, this water, a glass of water, and you add these grains of sugar to it, one by one, the grain of sugar will just dissolve. And then it reaches the saturation point, and you add one more grain of sugar, and all of a sudden a crystal will magically manifest. And the point is that any one of us having the recognition of, whether you call it, Wetiko, or this being a dream, or, the evil that's out there is a reflection of the evil in us, any one of us having that moment of awakening, of consciousness expansion, could be that grain of sugar that precipitates an expansion in the entire collective conscious of all of humanity. And we have to actually approach things as if that's true. It actually happens to be true. And if it'll ever happen, who's to say? But we really should hold that point of view as being true, so as to inspire ourselves. Because if we fall into despair or depression, or feel pessimistic about what's happening, then we're unwittingly becoming an agent for Wetiko, to propagate itself in the world. Because the way, you see, that this is important to understand. The way Wetiko works, it's like a virus in that it propagates itself. For example, think about, like, with Hitler in the Second World War. A lot of the Germans who were supporting him were just normal, good people. Some of them, a lot of them weren't, but some of them were, and they just thought, oh, I'm just, this person's out for my best interest, and they're by following somebody who's infected, who's embodying, who's possessed by Wetiko, they unwittingly or non-locally the agents that's actually helping the disease to propagate in the collective mind field. And so it's important to see the operations of how this virus, it's a virus of the mind, it's a parasite of the mind. When any one of us sees that, that actually makes it easier for all the rest of us to see it, because then that path is being cleared in the collective unconscious. So that's why, I keep on, like, really emphasizing for any one of us to actually have the recognition, whatever you call it, Wetiko, whether you realize the dreamlike nature, and then to connect with yourself, because by connecting with your true nature, that's the part of you that is not possessible, that can't be possessed by something beyond yourself in a negative way, that isn't open to having the negative mind control influence you. And then you access your own creative voice. And when there are enough of us who do that, we can literally, change the world in a way that does make a difference. And it's important, like I was saying, to not subscribe or buy into that despairing, depressing, feeling depressed, or, oh, I'm just going to give up or become pessimistic, because, like I was saying, that is unwittingly to become an agent for the propagation of Wetiko.
Right. So do you see this book in a direct line from your last book on the mind of George W. Bush?
Yeah, well, in the one on Bush, I actually, I think I was familiar with the term Wetiko. I think I cited it once, but I had used the word malignant egophrenia that I made up. I coined it, malignant egophrenia, which is absolutely the same as Wetiko. And and then I said, oh, you can call malignant egophrenia just ME, malignant egophrenia, like ME disease, just me disease. And it's also ME stands for Mad Emperor. I began playing with it, all the different meanings.
Right.
What it is that when the essence of Wetiko disease, it's a misidentification of who we think we are. When we actually think that we're an ego, that we're a separate self, and like I was suggesting before, being a dream, when we hold a viewpoint, the dream then reflects back and gives us all the evidence to confirm our viewpoint, and we then tricked ourselves out of our mind. When we actually identify ourselves as actually existing as this reference point, as an ego, as a separate self, that is Wetiko disease. And then we're, alienated from the environment, from other people, and from ourselves. And when other people are doing that, that's the fragmentation, that's the expression of Wetiko. And what I'm saying is that more and more people, this isn't just theory, more and more people around the planet are waking up, are snapping out of the spell of malignant egophrenia, Wetiko, whatever you call it, doesn't make a difference, and are actually having the realization, oh my God, who I am is the entire dream, is the universe, which means we're interconnected and interdependent. And the energetic expression of that realization is compassion. And compassion is the Wetiko dissolver par excellence. And so it's almost like this is an experiment, and we're like part of the experiment. And the whole question is there going to be, like a sufficient number of us who are going to wake up in time and put our realization together and change the dream? And that's what this is about. That's why I keep on saying Wetiko, it's the darkest, it's the source of the darkest evil possible, and encoded in it is the highest blessing, is a form of actual, like, this divinity.
Right, right. Now, there's a question that comes up, and that is, what is the relationship of Wetiko to the soul? If we take the soul, a soul seems to be an entity that is non-locally based. There's some science that says that the soul is a holographic fragment of source. That is, if you conceive of source as a sea of light, soul is like an egg of light. So right. That, and the totality, the principle of the hologram is that the totality of the hologram is in each fragment. Right. So that each of us carry around a holographic fragment of source. So that's there, and that is incarnated into this avatar that we call, Paul or Alfred or whoever else. And so what is the interaction between the Wetiko and the soul? How does that work?
So no, that's a really good question, because the thing about Wetiko is like this trickster-like energy, and it can't steal our soul, but it can trick us into giving it away ourselves. And that's actually what it does. So just your imagery too of, like, the soul being like, interfacing with the source, and we're all like these like little fragments or eggs of light of that greater source. One way of understanding that is that, it's like, as a species, we're in trauma, and we're all like disassociated from each other. It's like we're suffering from like this multiple personality disorder, in that we're disconnected from each other. And what I'm pointing at, so we're all like these fragments of light that aren't fully in association with each other. And when we have the recognition of who we are, like I was suggesting, that recognition involves snapping out of the sense that I exist separate from you or from anyone or from anything. And then all of a sudden I have the recognition, oh wow, we're actually not separate, we're interconnected. And that's beginning the process of actually, it's like, as an artist, I'm actually creating an art happening called Global Awakening. An art happening called Global Awakening, where we as artists and these dreamers, and our canvas is this universe, that we actually can create an art happening in which we dream ourselves awake, in which we help each other to wake up. And that's evolutionary, that's radical, and that's what's needed, and that's what's demanded of us. And that's what this whole play, if you see what's happening in the world as a play of our mind, that we're inside of our mind. Because, when you have the recognition of Wetiko, like I was suggesting, you realize, wow, it's an inner condition that somehow is synchronistically extending itself out in the world and configuring events in the seemingly outer world. Well, that's just like a dream. And so, and it collapses that boundary between the inner and the outer. So you've discovered, oh my God, I'm not out of my mind, i.e. like, kind of crazy. I'm inside my mind. I'm inside the psyche. All of this is the psyche. That's to have lucidity. And so I keep on going back to when enough of us realize that, and channel that realization, express that realization in our own creative way. I'm doing it in my own way by talking to you, or by, like, having these books that I write.
Right.
But other people might do it totally different by creating music or dance or who knows what. But that's all we can do, and that's all that we're needed. That's all that we can do. And then we just have to trust that something beyond ourselves that we're being a channel for is going to come through us.
Now, this is something that happened 15 years ago, but also in the introduction to the book, she writes, in the summer of 2000, I asked a group of 100 people at a conference of spiritually committed people who would push a red button if it would immediately stop all hard narcotics trafficking in their neighborhood, city and state and country, thus offending the people who control an estimated $500 billion to $1 trillion a year in global money laundering and accumulated capital. Out of 100 people, 99 said that they would not push the red button because they did not want their mutual funds to go down if the U.S. financial system suddenly stopped attracting capital. They did not want their government checks jeopardized or their taxes raised. And they preferred for adults to actively attempt to addict their neighbors' children, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the U.S., the largest economy in the world is the illegal drug trade, which is controlled by doping, which is really the most. It's the UK monarchies. It's the City of London bankers and just gangsters, and this goes back 300 years to the Opium Wars in China. And that seems to be a large part of what's running the U.S. now. A lot of illicit underground economies. So that objectively, the U.S. seems to be under a tremendous amount of dense, dark energies. So I'm just wondering how practically speaking is the U.S. going to get itself out of that?
Right. No, and I'm aware of that. I mean, that what you quoted, that's from Catherine from my forward.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
And no, I'm very aware of that. And the thing about Wetiko is that it feeds off of fear.
Yeah.
And so and the powers that be are more than happy to cultivate fear. Which when people then get hooked by it, that actually then becomes the opening for Wetiko to even further insinuate itself into our mind and body. And one thing to, and so that's as far as practically, I mean, that's a whole other question. I'm not quite sure what to say about that. I mean, I do have a whole chapter in my book. Really, I take the financial system as, sort of an example of how, like, Wetiko will sort of, like, kind of put off balance and sort of derange, like, this living system. But one thing to understand from the dreaming point of view, when light is emerging, when light is coming in, what happens? And what happens is all of the shadows become illumined and the darkness seemingly gets worse. And this is true when you study psychology or like metaphysics, that they'll say that when, as we begin to heal and as we begin to become conscious, and as our, whether the, whatever, like, demons we're struggling with or trauma, that, like, with trauma, for example, the compulsion to repeat the trauma literally gets more and more intense the closer we get to actually healing the trauma. And in the same way, when we actually are bringing in more and more light, the darkness on the surface seems to be getting worse. One other image of that is if you have dirty socks. One of my Buddhist teachers explained this to me, and he goes, if you wash the socks in the sink to wash out the dirt, what happens? It looks like it's getting worse. All the dirt's coming out, and it's easy to think, oh my God, this isn't working. But no, it's getting purified. It's coming out. It's getting clean. So in the same way, from the dreaming, so I always go back to viewing this from the dreaming point of view. You know, what that's saying is that, yeah, there's all the darkness. Instead of hiding underground or in the corners, it's not doing that anymore. It's completely out of the closet. It's showing itself. And that's an expression from the dreaming point of view that actually there's incredible light that's coming in, and all of us are feeling it. We're all going through all of the stuff, the personal stuff that we've actually been postponing having to deal with. One of the things that I've learned in my practice with people is that all of that stuff that, oh, I'll deal with that mañana, tomorrow, oh, I'll postpone it. You know, we can't postpone that anymore. We all are literally face to face with our darkest shadows, both personally and archetypally. And to the extent that any of us are able to really, you know, to deal with that, to integrate that, we actually become, in a way, like an antipsychotic in the greater body politic.
Right. So, for example, I'm going to one of the chapters in your book, and this is on the one on economics, and it says, seen as a symbolic entity, the destructive force working through the global financial system, for example, is the revelation of the essential features of the Wetiko disease, displayed graphically and schematically in its architecture, operations, and overall design, such that anyone with a trained eye can discern the telltale signs and spore prints of this maleficent psychopathology getting down to business. The global economy, which can appropriately be referred to as the destruction of the Amazon rainforest, or Monsanto instituting Terminator seeds, are the real-life enactments of this symbolic, self-destructive inner process. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, well, sure. Well, you see, one of the things I talk about Wetiko is that not only is it a parasite of the mind, like this mind virus, it's like this vampire. And so I actually have a whole chapter on the whole vampire archetype and what that's about. And, and one of the things that happens is that when you get bit by a vampire, you, at a certain point, it takes you over and you become a vampire, such that you then feel compelled to pass it on to others, and the thing about Wetiko is that, in a sense, it's a psychic eating disorder, in that, because one of the definitions is of the indigenous people define it as it's cannibal disease. So you just overly consume and you're never satiated. In Buddhism, they'll talk about the hungry ghost with a wide mouth and a thin, throat and neck and a huge stomach, and it can never get satiated. It always wants more and more and more, and it's at the root of people who have addictions. That's Wetiko. Wetiko is informing the addictive process. And so what I'm pointing at in that chapter is that the way the global financial system is actually set up, I actually call it the wet economy, I combine the term like economy and Wetiko with the wet economy, and that it's a house of cards that actually at a certain point it's unsustainable and it's invariably, it's going to have to collapse. So whether it's tomorrow or in 10 years or who knows when, that's to be seen. But it's totally built on shifting sand. It has no actual real foundation. And, you could say it's a Ponzi scheme, or it's all based on bribery, or it's all based on fear, or creating this, this debt that's never to be paid back. But it's all in that chapter. I really sort of map and articulate how, when you study the financial system in a certain way, you have the realization of this insatiable greed, and we have to have ever expanding growth, and that is the expression of Wetiko disease. That is that sense of not knowing when enough is enough and only prioritizing short-term profits at the expense of the biosphere, where we're literally destroying the very biosphere of the planet, the life support system of the planet. And people who are doing that are all, because I'm going to have more money right now. Well, if that isn't a sign of insanity, I don't know what is. So one other way of understanding this from like this sort of more expanded point of view is that it's really clear we as a species are actually destroying ourselves, okay? But what I'm pointing out in the book is that why are we destroying ourselves? And I point out that we're destroying ourselves as the way, as a medium, as the vehicle, so as to learn how not to destroy ourselves, because we clearly haven't learned how not to destroy ourselves, or we wouldn't be destroying ourselves. So you see, once again, encoded in the pathology is the medicine. And it also, that's one of the key things in alchemy. They'll talk about, it's called the coincidentia oppositorum, the coincidence of opposites. When you begin to discover that the opposites become indistinguishable, and you break through the polarization and you realize, wow, is Wetiko the deepest poison, the deepest evil, or is it the greatest medicine? And you discover it's both. It's a superposition of states. And it all, just like in physics, is light, a wave, or a particle. Well, it depends how you observe it. Same thing with Wetiko. How is it going to manifest? Is it going to destroy our species and take us down? Or is it going to wake us up? Well, it all depends how we dream it. That's the point.
Right, right. So are you a long-term optimist or a long-term pessimist?
Yeah, I'm, just honestly, I've developed a particular facility. So I study a lot of what's going on in the world. I watch the evening news on TV to see how the propaganda is being presented. And then I do a lot of study, on my own about trying to understand what's really happening. And it's incredibly dark. I mean, just even what just happened in Paris and how it just totally, it seems, fairly clear it's some sort of false flag, and it feeds right into the agenda of the powers that be to militarize governments and police and, and centralize power, ad infinitum. But the point is, I've developed a facility when I, see this stuff and study it. There are a lot of people I know who just can't deal with it and get depressed and get, overwhelmed with despair and get pessimistic. But somehow I've developed this muscle, this psychic muscle, where as I more and more see the incredible darkness and unnecessary destruction and inhumanity that Wetiko is inspiring, it gets me even more inspired to even be more of help and even to further refine my message and to be more of a positive agent in the world. And I think that's important. That's an important facility for more and more of us to really develop.
Right, right. So in a way, by producing books as you have and creating insights and knowledge as you have, you're deconstructing this illness. Is that kind of what's going on?
Yeah, no, totally. I'm actually, I've actually, and I know this isn't for everyone because, a lot of people, it would just be too much. But you see, it was like one way of describing, just to go back to your very first question of how I first came to be able to write a book about Wetiko, how I have the authority to author a book about Wetiko is because I had the father I did, who was unwittingly taken over by Wetiko. He was completely possessed by it. And he was like this instrument, like a vector through which I got literally a transfusion of the Wetiko virus into me. Almost like how a shaman, and I knew nothing about shamanism at that point. I was really young in my early 20s, but how a shaman, in a sense, they say, takes on the illness and gets ill themselves. And I literally got sick. It literally almost destroyed me. It drove me insane. And but I didn't understand. I didn't know that, so often people of shamanic temperament, they look like they're having a nervous breakdown, but it's actually some form of like breakthrough if they can somehow have the strength and the courage to integrate what's going on inside of them. Then they can actually over time heal the disease in them and then transmit that healing to the client or the tribe or the community or the planet. And so, because I was just completely taken down and, like I said, almost destroyed by Wetiko, it has forced me to deconstruct, to really understand what is this. And at a certain, I would be studying outside in trying to understand it. But then at a certain point, I couldn't get away from my own complicity. You see, that's what's really important with evil, is that it's really easy to see it out there. And then, like I was saying before, if you see Wetiko out there and you think that you don't have it, then you've fallen under its spell. The enlightened point of view is to see how Wetiko plays out in your world and to have the realization of how you're enabling it, of how you're participating in it, of how you're complicit in the very evil that you're reacting against. That's the beginning of where you're really having an expansion of consciousness, which is the very perspective that actually heals Wetiko. You know, so I should just say I'm in the middle of a new book that I'm writing. I'm almost finished. It's being edited, and it's a companion volume to my current book on Wetiko, and it's about my own personal process, about my own encounter with evil through my father and through the psychiatric system. You know, and I'm really just being super transparent and vulnerable and sharing my own madness, the part of me that was infected with Wetiko, and describing how I've acted it out in my own way. So I'm basically having myself be my own case study to sort of personally flesh out the ideas I talk about in my book on Wetiko, Dispelling Wetiko. You know, so the two are going to be companion volumes. And I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to just, like, you know, if it's going to trigger people and people think I'm nuts, that's fine. I feel that this is so important for people to understand that I'm offering my own process as, like, you know, my own guinea pig in a way.
Well, in your book you write, Wetiko is, quote, the word made flesh in its most depraved form. In finding the name, however, we are accessing the divinely sponsored power of the word to create an idea, a living psychic organism of real value and merit. So are you saying that by going into Wetiko, our systems find the good? Is that
what I'm saying? Like how I, because you're referencing sort of the conclusion of the book where I talk about the profound importance of finding the name, and what I'm pointing at is in mythologies and fairy tales the world over, whenever there's a demon, you know, the most important thing is to find the name of the demon, and not just any name. It has to be the right name, the proper name of the demon. Right. When you find the name of the demon, you depotentiate it. You take away its power while simultaneously empowering yourself. So the point being that there's this sort of amorphous, invisible, formless, you know, energy, Wetiko, that's just playing itself out. You know, it's just wreaking havoc on all dimensions of our existence. And it's able to do that because it's operating, like I've been saying, through the unconscious, because we're not aware of it. And the thing that helps us to become aware of it, just like Adam in the Garden of Eden, what was his first job? His first job was naming things. You know, that was when he was able to differentiate. When you're able to name something, you've actually distinguished yourself from it. You've objectified the thing. You've separated yourself from it, you know, and that's what, so there's a profound magical power in finding the name of a demon. Now, I should just say, with a reference to a demon, I don't want to edge people out. In psychology, what a demon is, when we have trauma, and if you remember, we're a species in trauma, we split off, we disassociate. And then a part of us can actually develop a quasi-seemingly independent life and will of its own. The psychological term is an autonomous complex. And indigenous people would call autonomous complexes demons. That's what they are. That's equivalent. An autonomous complex and a demon are pointing at the same, like, sort of, you know, entity whose origin is our own mind. And the point being, when you actually have the name, you can speak its name, and you are able to be fluent in being able, with language, to be able to point at it and objectify it, then you're taking away its power over you. And the idea then is, like, once you find the name, then my book is creating an idea. It's creating an idea. What is an idea? It's a way of seeing the world. It's like this meme that I'm offering, and there's more and more of us. And it doesn't have to be the name Wetiko. It can be, you know, the archons and Gnosticism. It doesn't make a difference what the name is, as long as it helps you to signify it, to symbolize it, to, you know, access your own intrinsic divine creative power. then all of a sudden, then what's happening? You're actually
Right.
more and more connecting with you. You're actually connecting. You're doing a soul retrieval. You were talking about the soul before. You're actually retrieving your soul. And what I'm saying is that any one of us doing that has an enormous effect on the whole, because, like you were saying, any fragment of the hologram contains the whole hologram. But as more and more of us are actually involved in this process of waking up and connecting with each other, it's what I call we can dream ourselves awake. And that's a phrase I have. So it's like we can conspire to co-inspire, which is another phrase I've coined. Conspire to co-inspire, which is a true conspiracy theory, to dream ourselves awake. And what I'm really talking about is evolution. That's what the Wetiko virus, like unlike like a regular virus that will have a mutation when we bring in like the medicine, it mutates to like have resistance to the medicine. Wetiko forces us to mutate. Wetiko literally demands that we evolve or else.
What are some of the visible manifestations or effects out there that you're seeing from the publication of this book and its kind of and its ideas and insights spreading?
Yeah. Well, sure. So just about every day I get emails from people all around the world who are thanking me for saying, "Oh my God, you found the words. You've been able to create like language to find the words for experiences that I've been having that I just didn't have language for." And because one of the things with trauma and with abuse is that we become disassociated from our experience, we become inwardly fragmented, and we become severed from our voice. And our voice, the word voice, is related etymologically to the word calling, which is related to the word genius, which is related to the word daimon. And remember, Wetiko is a daimonic energy, and daimon is the guiding spirit of the inner voice. So when we connect with our voice, that also helps us to connect with our mission in life, with vocation, with what we're here to do. So because I almost got destroyed by this virus, and I've somehow been able to come through and come out the other side, and I'm still a work in progress, like we all are. And I found my voice, and I've been able to find the words for these inner experiences that are incredibly personal, and at the same time, they're like these universal experiences that every single person on the planet is going through. And so basically the answer to your question, I mean, I can answer it in a lot of different ways, but that's the one thing that first comes to mind is that more and more people are just like so grateful for like, oh my God, you've been able to find the words for what I've been experiencing and just didn't have words for. And all of a sudden it makes me feel not crazy.
Very, very good. There's a particular question that I would like to ask you in this context, and I've been thinking about it, and that's online behavior. Not so much face-to-face, but emails, email forums, email wars, which people tend to get into very, very frequently, and which become extremely polarized, and in which people are calling each other the most incredibly horrible names, in email wars and in characterizing people and in putting out, say if you put out articles, and then comments will come in saying the most horrible things about the author, or people email each other, or comments on Facebook about each other seem to be in some cases extremely polarized, extremely beyond non-loving but hateful,
right?
And a complete lack of love. And if I could just say this, somewhere around the mid-'80s, I was in Washington, and the place where I was, Colonel Jim Channon of the First Earth Battalion used to bring over printouts of ARPANET when the internet was first being developed. And it struck me that the whole internet and all of email came out of the war machine, which is the ultimate expression of duality consciousness, which is I win, you lose. And it seems to me that the email format, which leads to email wars, which are the ultimate expression of duality consciousness, or I win, you lose, that's a medium in which behavior on the internet is really, I mean, there's cyber stalking, there's people do horrible things to each other on the internet, and they depersonalize each other in forums all over the place. Have you thought about the particular application of the Wetiko insight to internet behavior and email behavior?
Yeah, no, well, I mean, I'm aware of what you're describing, and I have as little to do with, I don't even have a cell phone, by choice. And, what you're describing with, the non-loving or the hateful interactions that people have over the internet, that I see, the image that comes up for me is I can imagine behind the scenes, the Wetiko virus just, sort of being ecstatic as it feeds off of the misunderstanding and the separation and the hurt that's being, created via that channel, and, because particularly it's so easy. I'll see it I'll have, on Amazon, my book is for sale, and, there'll be, people will write endorsements, and some, and the overwhelming majority, thankfully, of the endorsements are really positive, but every now and then there'll be just an endorsement, like a 1-star, and the person will just be like, spewing this toxic venom. And, it's interesting for me because of being in the role. I'm, probably with you too, Alfred, the idea of sort of being a public figure and being out on the front lines. I've trained myself, to like, when I get shadow projections like that, when I get these like negative projections, and the thing about projections, even though they're just, they don't have a physical actual mass or weight, they're real. They have they're palpable, energetically speaking, and they have a subtle body all their own, and it can be really hurtful. And part of my practice and part of my training is to sort of, okay, when something like that comes my way, yeah, it might hurt at first or trigger a reaction in me, but then part of my spiritual practice is just to metabolize that and work on that and have that actually be even a gift, have that even help me even more to connect with what I know to be true, to connect with my heart, to step out of just my compulsive reactivity and to deactivate my trigger and to connect with myself. So more and more, it's almost like alchemically I'm transmuting even something like that, which can be like a really negative experience, into something that's actually supporting my awakening. And I think that all of us, really have to be able to do that more and more, or it just becomes too much of a burden and we can actually become sick. I mean, the idea of, like people, the underlying black magic is like negative projections. We just, in that energetic domain, we put out negative shadow projections on somebody, and it can literally, not only make them sick, it can kill people. So this is real stuff.
Right. And so then one can begin on the internet to identify forums or locations that are more loving and others that are more Wetiko infested, just to put it that way.
Yeah. No, yeah. That's true. And, and it's important. I mean, the idea of, cultivating compassion, like I was saying before, compassion, which is the energetic expression when you're in a dream and you have lucidity and you realize, oh my God, all these other people in the dream are just my own dream characters, which means they're embodied reflections of myself, that we're all not separate, we're interconnected. The expression of that realization is compassion. And so when you connect with that love, with that compassion, that is an expression that you're connecting with who you are, with your true nature. And that is that compassion, that love, your true nature, that is the Wetiko dissolver par excellence. But the thing about compassion, it's not like a smiley face compassion, because a lot of New Age people, I know people who won't even read my book. There was like a bookstore that wouldn't even carry my book, a spiritual bookstore, because, oh, they don't want to put their attention on evil. And I was trying to point out that, wait, but by you avoiding looking at the darkness, you're unwittingly feeding it. And, the idea is to see the evil, how it plays out through your own mind. And then you, as a sovereign being, you realize, oh, I can choose where I place my attention. And I don't want to overly become fascinated with the evil. I don't want to avoid it. But I can, now that I've seen it, now I can choose and I can place my attention on creating the world I want to live in out of love. But the thing about love and compassion is that it can be fierce. And sometimes it involves saying no and setting boundaries. And that, so, compassion can have a wrathful quality to it. It's not just a smiley face. A lot of metaphysical people just think of it as being like this smiley face, patting on the back compassion, and that's idiot compassion in Buddhism. That's not the real compassion.
Right. Now, do you think that right now, in this century, in the 21st century, at this moment, is this like the worst Wetiko pandemic that has occurred to humanity in modern history?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing about Wetiko, it's been insinuating itself throughout the centuries. I mean, in all different guises and variations. I mean, the 20th century wasn't a piece of cake, but I would say that the illness, it's almost like becoming more acute and more like it's like a healing crisis.
I see.
And so in a certain way, I feel like we're approaching an event horizon.
I see.
And and everybody I know is just feeling the greater intensity and the pressure and the inability to avoid and more and more people are just realizing, well, I can't postpone coming to terms with my own stuff. So yeah, I think from the deeper sort of meta point of view, like more expanded point of view,
yeah,
I think that there is like this is like this psychic epidemic. It is gone pandemic, and it's literally going to destroy our species. Like I was saying, it's taking down the biosphere. I mean, as an example, but yet there's also the other part of it, which is that also available in that extremity of the disease, is this incredible potential for like having like this realization of who we are. And that's in a sense, so one way of understanding this, and I talk about this in the book, if you remember, I said Wetiko has all these different like sort of like, there's the psychological dimension, which is like shadow projection. And then there's the more, when you have the realization, well, from the more spiritual point of view, it's like the coming of the Messiah. The word Messiah, it literally means the coming to consciousness of the self. That's what it means psychologically. And so the word, the apocalypse means something hidden is being revealed. And so the self is actually incarnating. And instead of it incarnating through one man like it did through Christ 2,000 years ago, it's incarnating through all of us, through the unconscious of our species. And the self is revealing itself through the darkness, through evil. And because the self is a conjunction of opposites, it's the coincidence of opposites, like I was talking about before. And we're the vehicle that actually somehow, if we're up to the task of being able to bring those opposites together in ourselves and not polarize and not split them off, then we become the medium, the vehicle, the conduit, the agent for that incarnating self, which is the Messiah. So there's an unbelievable, like unspeakable positive element to what's happening, but absolutely positively, it all depends on if enough of us have the recognition. There's a deeper process that's happening. And whether you call it Wetiko, Archons, whatever, every wisdom tradition, what makes a wisdom tradition worthy of the name wisdom tradition is they've illumined and mapped and articulated Wetiko in their own, the Kabbalah. That's what the Kabbalah, I just wrote an article last year on the Kabbalah. completely describing Wetiko in an unbelievably beautiful, creative way. And so, what all depends on and what all this is about is if we have the recognition of that there's like a deeper process that we're actually playing a role in the incarnation of the deity. And when enough of us realize that, we can then channel it consciously as individuation. And if we don't realize it and if we stay unconscious, then it's just going to become self and other destructive and we'll be destroying everything.
So in a certain way, Jung was one of the prophets of Wetiko.
Oh my God, he didn't know the word Wetiko, but I mean, I've quoted Jung in my book hundreds of times. I literally had to pay Princeton University Press a bunch of money to do that.
Yeah.
But I was happy to do that. Jung was one of the greatest geniuses of all time. I mean, he was a modern day shaman and alchemist. And everything I'm saying is Jung. Jung was saying this exact same thing. I'm not saying anything new. He was saying it in his own way, in the idiom. Like, I'm just like translating what Jung was saying and what the alchemists were saying and the Gnostics were saying and the Native Americans were saying and the shamans were saying. I'm just translating it into a modern psychological idiom.
Yeah.
But Jung, I can't say enough about like Jung's genius. And, and people shouldn't get hooked. He was a flawed human being like we all are. He had a shadow like we all do. So I would just suggest don't get hooked by that. Just really try to connect with like, he was like some sort of like prophet trying to point at, what was being demanded of us as a species to survive. And, if I hadn't found the work of Jung, I probably wouldn't be here today. I'd probably be dead right now. When I found Jung, because I was having a whole spiritual awakening that got, like I said, thrown in hospitals and pathologized. And then when I got out of it, and the whole while I knew I was having an awakening, so I never subscribed to the psychiatric viewpoint. And then I found the work of Jung, and it blew my mind because I realized, oh my God, here's like at least one other person who's like experienced what I've been going through, and he's actually was able to articulate it. And so that's why, he literally saved my life.
Right. And so now our job is to be able to find and look at our shadows safely. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but not, okay, what I'm saying is the shadow, so the shadow has a personal dimension, and absolutely we need to really come to terms with our own personal, shadow, but also the shadow has an archetypal dimension, and that's, the archetypal evil, that is Wetiko. And yeah, but any of us doing shadow work, and keep in mind the shadow also there's a golden shadow or a positive shadow, because the shadow is just the part of us that we're not really consciously in touch with and we disown. And, one way to think about like whatever image we have of ourselves. And the shadow is typically negative. So if I think I'm a good, kind, spiritual person, well, the shadow part of me, just take the polar opposite of that. And that's how the shadow in me, sees the world. But there's a golden shadow, a positive shadow. People are so willing to just project their own genius, onto Guruji or onto Jung or onto whoever it is, and they're just disassociating and giving away their own genius. And the idea is owning our shadow means to also own the part of us that is the Buddha, that is an incredible genius, and that is an awakened person, a creative person. And so and interestingly, the way to own that golden shadow, that genius part of us, is as we get more and more, as we add more light to the darker part of the shadow, and we embrace that and metabolize that, that becomes the doorway to the part of us that interfaces with the higher good, with the light-filled shadow. So yeah, so that would be absolutely, it's profoundly important. As a matter of fact, Jung has a quote saying, the existence of our species depends on if enough of us, I'm paraphrasing, have the recognition of the shadow and come to terms with it.
Right. So, what would you, just looking to our listeners, we're now coming up to a fairly important transitional period over the next couple of years, a kind of a make it or break it point. many people say, although that's always said, oh, it's a make it or break it point.
Right.
But there's a lot of people that say, oh, you know, the positive ETs are coming down and saying there's going to be a positive expansion of consciousness just a couple of, you know, by by 2017, and these years of 2015, 2016 are really the transformation of the current order into a new, more positive, more expansive order. Assuming that there's something to that, what is your suggestion or vision that you would share with people, given your insights here, how to best navigate through these years?
Right. No, I appreciate that. And, you know, it's funny, as you were asking the question, I began thinking about, you know, quantum physics is, you know, in the West, that's like one of the great of you know, sort of like traditions infused with wisdom. And in the book, I talk about quantum physics a lot. And one of the main insights of quantum physics is that, you know, you can't even talk, it makes no sense at all to talk about an objective universe. That the way we observe the universe actually invokes the universe that we observe. And so the idea is that there's nothing in a definite state, it's all probabilistic. And so the point is that, you know, what's happening now, like I was saying before, it's not in a determined state. It's not definite what's going to happen. It's probabilistic in the sense that it might go this way or that way. We might destroy ourselves. We might wake up. And so for me, you know, I go back to, you see, encoded in that daimonic energy, which is Wetiko, is the creative spirit. And the most toxic thing in the human psyche is unexpressed creativity. So if any of us don't express our creativity in whatever way, I'm not just talking painting and drawing. I mean, we could be going for a walk and we're being creative. But, you know, the idea being that, like I was saying, this world is our palette and is our canvas. And so the idea, anything that inspires us, you know, just out of our, you know, hypnotic spell, because a way of describing Wetiko, it's like we've actually, you know, you referenced before about the mind control technologies of the powers that be, and that's all true. But Wetiko, that's just like a projection of what we're doing to our own mind, to the extent we're under the spell of Wetiko. One way of understanding Wetiko, it's actually an autoerotic hypnotic spell. We're literally brainwashing ourselves moment by moment. We've entrained or entranced ourselves as if we've fallen under a spell, as if there's some sort of external figure, but there's ultimately, that external figure has left long ago. The ultimate hypnotist is our own selves doing the hypnosis on our own mind. So anything that inspires us to snap out of that particular, like, it's like a self-reinforcing feedback loop that seems to develop an autonomy and seems to have an intrinsic reality when you really inquire into it. Just like you were saying before, when you wake up from a nightmare, it just, what happened in the nightmare? It's not there anymore. And you realize, oh, what's left is who I am. This is my true nature. Anything that inspires us to connect with that and to express that, you know, in a creative way, that itself, then we literally become not a secret agent of Wetiko, our secret being secret even to ourselves, but we then become an agent that can literally make a difference in the world to change the world. And that's not just some sort of like this you know, sort of like metaphysical, like new agey woo-woo. This is what it's all about, that is who we are. We are these incredible bodhisattvic beings, and that we just need to like own and step into in a conscious way, you know, and then we can literally like change the dream, you know, in a way where, like I was suggesting, like quantum physics is saying, well, how's it going to manifest? Is it probably this way or that way? Well, then we make it more probable. The more of us who wake up and connect with each other and realize, wow, if I help you awaken, guess what? It helps me, because this isn't this competitive sport. We're not separate. That is to step out of like malignant egophrenia, me disease, Wetiko, whatever you call it, and to connect with our hearts, with our genius, with our true nature, and that can literally change the world. And that's anything that helps us to understand that helps us to realize that inspires us in towards that direction, so that we can creatively express that realization in our own way. That's the solution.
Very good. Very good. Do you have anything that you haven't said that you would like to share at this point? Any particular item that we may not have covered?
I appreciate that. Sure. And like, I mean, on the one hand, my first thought was, well, no, I feel kind of complete. But on the other hand, it's always a helpful, like, for example, there was this one Tibetan translator, this very esteemed translator of Tibetan Buddhism, and we were having coffee, and we had a little bit of a difference of opinion, because he was saying, oh, well, what the Buddha was saying is that this world is like a dream, that it was just a metaphor, that it's not really a dream, but it's like a dream. And I was saying, well, no, what the Buddha was saying is that this is a dream. Just like our night dream is a dream, that it's an actual like reflection of our mind, of our deeper mind, not just our conceptual cognitive mind, but of mind with a capital M. And that this is our own energy just appearing to us seemingly outside of ourselves that we're just reacting to. That the idea being that our experience isn't like a dream, that this is a dream. We're having a collective mass shared dream. And when you begin to realize that, and when you begin to interpret your experiences like that, and when you begin to develop he actually said his whole life he was fighting for the reinstitution of symbolic awareness. Well, what is the language of dreams? It's symbols. That this universe is an oracle. It's a revelation. It's an ongoing revelation. It's an epiphany. It's a theophany that's speaking symbolically. Symbols being the language of dreams. And when you begin to interpret your experiences as if you're interpreting a dream, and you see what parts of myself played out in that little vignette that just played out, and how would I interpret that, and realizing, wait a second, I myself am the generator of meaning. There's no meaning intrinsic to the dream. I'm the one who's creating the meaning. It's coming out of my own mind. And all of a sudden, we begin to recognize ourselves as incredibly powerful creative agents of change. And to the extent that any one of us realize we might be that grain of sugar that crystallizes a whole, like I was suggesting before, that crystallizes a change in the entire collective psyche of humanity. And so I just really want to urge everybody who's hearing this to just to keep the faith, in the sense to not fall into pessimism, to not fall into despair, to just really connect with your heart, to really embody what it is to be an awake person as best you can, understanding that we're all a work in process and in progress. I mean, I certainly am, and that we can literally connect with each other and help each other. And like I was saying before, conspire to co-inspire, to dream ourselves awake, and to create the art happening called, the whole, the global awakening. That's really, in essence, what's available to us. And it would be tragic if we just missed the opportunity. There's an incredible opportunity that's being offered to us through this world crisis. And even think about it, the word opportunity, with the other meaning of the word crisis. The meaning of the word crisis, the other half of it is opportunity. That's what I'm pointing at. There's something available to us that's never been available to us as a species, that we couldn't even imagine until now. And I'm just like wanting to to offer it and to point at it and to articulate it as best I can to help my own understanding and to try to transmit it to other people, because it's something that anybody else who taps into it, I get as much help as they do, and we all can help each other. We can all step out of the separate self together.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, yeah. Where can people find your book, and where can people find your work?
Thanks. Yeah, so I have this website, and I have a ton of articles, all for free, and you can order the book. And you can order the book on Amazon too, but if you want to order it through my website, and I then be an autographed copy. And the website is AWAKEN inthedream.com. awakeninthedream.com. So just remember, no ing after awaken. That's why I spell it out like that. So and then when you go to awakeninthedream.com, there's a ton of, just like this, of interviews. There's like close to, I don't know, 100 articles, all totally for free. Because the point is, I'm not doing this for the money. I'm wanting to get this information out. And then, if you want to order my book, that would be great. I want to say, if anything I said today spoke to you, I mean, the thing with the book, it was kind of like what I'm here to do. I mean, something really came through me. So if you found what I'm speaking about interesting, or it activated something in you, then I would suggest, you might really appreciate the book. Yeah. So thank you.
Well, we certainly want to thank you for taking the time out and the tremendous focus that you bring to this, to share with these insights with us that you bring from your personal experience. As you say, I bring authority.
Yeah, totally. I know.
Good. And we hope that in the future you can join us again from time to time as events develop.
Oh, I'd be delighted. I really want to thank you so much, Alfred. Really,
sure,
thank you.
Certainly. Okay, well, thank you very much then.
Okay, thank you, totally.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, thank you.